Hey everybody, welcome to the Deep End Games. I'm Joe Wiggins and I am here with Jordan Draper of Darkflight Games. And we are going to do a brief interview. He is currently has a Kickstarter called Import Export, which if you listen to our show, you've heard a little bit about on Kickstarter right now. And so we are going to be doing an interview with him, get some information about him, his company, what he's been doing in the gaming industry, and just a little bit about the game that you might have some interest on if you've been looking at it on Kickstarter. So Jordan, how are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Joe. Excited to be here.
All right. Well, no problem, man. Really excited about it as well. But real quick, let me go ahead and ask you, how did you get into the modern board gaming hobby? Because, for a lot of people, it's not necessarily something you just fall into. You don't just wake up one day and there's a copy of Settlers of Catan there. It's something that you, for the most part, either someone introduces you to or you kind of are looking for it. But how did you end up in the gaming hobby?
Yeah, so around 2007, 2008, I had a mutual friend who had a friend who just got into the hobby, who I've been going to game nights with ever since. I went to a local store and sat down with them, and they were playing, I think it was Gold Rush or some game where you're trying to explore and find gold. I can't even remember what it was anymore, but I was really piqued by the interest of the mechanics that are going on in the game, and I loved a bunch of old standard games like everybody's favorites from Monopoly when they were kids and everything, right? So I'm thinking, okay, there's this new genre of like subculture going on that I didn't know about. So I explored it some more, and since then I've played thousands of games and at least once a week have a game night. So after I fell into it around 2007, 2008, I just kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper every month.
Awesome. And that kind of sounds a little bit kind of how it was for me, because when I got into gaming, kind of my first thoughts were, oh, this is what I've been looking for a while. Like I was looking for something. And when I finally played my first game, I was like, this is something that I've been wanting to do. I just didn't know it existed.
Absolutely. I think it was the same thing. It was like an eye-opening experience. And as a designer, I just love that there's so many like little niche games going on here and there. You know that I love quirky games. It's kind of reflected in my design
Yeah.
as a designer. So when I found out that there were all these crazy little games, and like I lived in Japan for a while, and there's a whole other game market there that we don't even see here in the US because the rules don't get translated, the games don't come over. So I've just been falling into that as like a subculture hobby of mine.
And a lot of that's interesting because a lot of the designs, because I have all of your previous games too. And as I think about it, that kind of makes sense because, the Japanese games, that subculture, I have some friends that are really into that style of games and kind of bring the rules over, get the rules translated, make paste ups and everything for those games. And I can see a lot of that kind of emphasis kind of put into your designs, very small box, very few components, but with really good decisions to make. And kind of that seems to kind of have a way of just kind of infesting the games that you've designed. Do you think that has a lot of just kind of has put a lot into your game designs, is living over there and seeing that culture of it as well?
Oh, absolutely. Growing up in the US, I thought that bigger was always better and that was the way to go. But when I lived in Japan, I found out that, they don't have a lot of space, and the decisions that they have to make are very concise and minimal, I would say. But it's in a very good way. Oink Games is a great example because they've come over here and they're kind of becoming widespread. But all of their games, you'll find they have minimal components, like you're saying. And I think that reflects into putting constraints as a designer. When you're thinking about what you have to do in the game, it gives you a nice way to look at how you want to form it together, I guess, because you have to make very intense decisions from a very minimal amount of choices. And that clarifies the game as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. That really makes me think a lot as I look back on the games of yours. That's really interesting that does have a big kind of footprint into your games. But let me ask you this. This is kind of a off the wall question, but what was the first game that you played that really kind of put its kind of talons into you and kind of just said like, oh, this game is amazing? What was the game that really kind of hooked you?
Yeah, for me, that was Container. And I will admit, I blind bought Container, the first edition, and this was the first game that I ever bought. because I was just,
Oh, wow.
yeah, I loved shipping containers. I mean, I'm into shipping container architecture. That's kind of my other hobby, is that I'm really into minimalist architecture and kind of do it on the side and make models and design some buildings. I went to school for it. But long story short, I saw container and I just had to have it. I read a little bit about it, blind bought it, and it blew my mind. Just the fact that you could have an economic system run by players inside of a game. And that kind of grasped me and brought me all the way to here. So
Yeah, container is amazing. And I've said before, I think container is probably the most pure economic game that's out there in the market today, because it's your decisions that drive the economy, and that's just that's such a phenomenal way that can work. I really love auctions in games and just how player dependent everything can be based on those auctions, because its value is relative to what someone is willing to pay for it, and that's really cool that's in there. And I really do see a lot of that reflection in the game Import Export. But one more kind of another off the wall question, but you said you have weekly game days. What is, other than one that you've designed, what is the last game that you played?
the last game I played actually was Indonesia, and I got really excited about it because I heard you talking about it on the podcast. And I love systems that are kind of built into economic chains and like companies forming and coming apart and merging. So when I played that game, we had just short of a 6-hour play session. And
Oh,
man,
wow.
that game is amazing. I will say one thing that was kind of weird though. It was our first time playing, and we got sectioned off from part of the map, and nobody could get over there because all the shipping lines were already out before the last era came. And so it was like the game kept getting delayed because nobody wanted to take the last couple of cards in this area that they couldn't do anything in. So that was kind of an interesting ending. But as far as the mechanics of that game go, man, it was phenomenal. I just love the decisions you have to make when you're merging lines and trying to like talk people into using your shipping line over somebody else's. It felt very real.
Yeah, oh man, Container is, if you've listened to our podcast, my #1 game of all time. It's absolutely phenomenal, and I'm glad that you enjoyed it so much. But yeah, that game just can do so many interesting things because it's a player driven everything in that game, and so I just find it so interesting that the mechanics are so loose in the game, and I think that's kind of a hallmark of Splotter that allows the player exploration without breaking the game apart, and so I find that really interesting. But yeah, I definitely Indonesia. Wow. I'm glad that was the one that you got to mention. That's phenomenal. I love that game. So let's kind of get into a little bit more deeper kind of stuff about maybe you and about Darkflight Games. But why don't you tell us about how Darkflight Games actually came to be? What was kind of the impetus that led that to starting?
Yeah, so my best friend, he's a neuroscientist, and he's also a chemist, and he and I always work on these projects together. We're really into video games, and we played like Little Big Planet was one of our favorite games because you could make your own levels and do everything in it. So we were like, let's start just some kind of a minimalist video game app company, and maybe we'll make some PlayStation games. So this was our original idea, is what we're going to do. So we made 2 or 3 iPhone apps, and then I mean, we both love board games, and we were into board games, and so we had this kind of dumb moment, like, why aren't we making board games? That's like a quicker, easier way to do it, and we both love them, so let's try designing one. And that's when Poison Bottles came about. We designed that game for like a year, just on and off, testing it here and there, and eventually decided to just go for it. And once I had made one game, I was addicted. I just love making games, play testing them, talking to people about them, doing the design, doing the artwork. I mean, I love every aspect of it, and I consider it a big passion of mine. So yeah, I'm just happy that people are enjoying them. So
Yeah, and I would say that if anything, you're probably the definition of an indie niche publisher. You are pretty much, doing your own thing, kickstarting your games, getting them funded, and then producing them. And a lot of your games are handmade, aren't they? Pretty much. I know that they're printed, but they're pretty much made by hand.
yeah, every game before Import Export was made by hand, including the boxes were also made by hand. So
Yeah, that's one of my favorite features, is just that you can tell that the boxes that the games came in are just stamped with the logos for the game, and some of them are just slightly off kilter, and that's interesting to me because I kind of actually adore that aspect of your games. When I got my copy of Turin Market, the fact that the rulebook had thread sewing the rulebook together, I kind of looked at that and I was like, amazing. I think that's one of the coolest things. And so I know a lot of people that I know out there are big fans of yours. And while you might be more in the niche side of things and more independent than what a lot of the mainstream companies are, developed quite a fan base. And so Poison Bottles, real quick, let me ask you a question about that. How did the idea of mixing a trick-taking game that involved a memory aspect, how did that come about? What was kind of the thought process behind, well, let's make a trick-taking game where there's going to be aspects of the game that you actually have to remember things?
Yeah, that's kind of a weird decision to make. When I think about it now, but we love the idea of like the nines and golf type of games, and we'd always play them with my business partner's family. So we were thinking, how can we implement this in a new way and like put a twist on it? So we came up with the idea of like using the poison bottles in the game, which completely throw it off in a new direction. And the only way that we could think to tie it together to decide who was going to be doing what type of action each turn was to make it a trick-taking game, because we wanted this evaluation between like, if I spend cards in the trick, then how's that going to affect my decisions of what I could do depending on my position after the trick has been decided. So it was a big balance of like, how can we make everything as optimally placed so that you're trying to counterbalance your decisions on how the end game turns out, and try to remember as many things as you can, which is kind of brutal. A lot of people don't like that you have to remember so many things, but for us, it's like we want as much of a challenge as possible.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed the game, but one of the members of my game group, Megan Naxer, she did a top 10 list with me of the top 10 of 2016 on the What Did You Play This Week podcast where I contribute. And before we got into our top 10, I just asked her, what was the worst game you played in 2016? And she said it was Poison Bottles. And she said the memory aspect just drove her nuts. And she was like, oh, I just couldn't deal with it. And so that's funny. It does throw a lot of people. And so I always make sure I tell people before I break the game, I was like, okay, this has a memory aspect to it, guys. So be prepared for that. And so that can scare a lot of people off. But that was really cool that was your first design. After that, that led to Turin Market. Is that right?
Yeah, that was the next one.
And now Turin Market is, for people that don't know, a very small box auction game where you're going to be basically putting cards out for auction and have a limited source of money and income. And you're going to basically be blind bidding for these cards that will come up for majorities in different kinds of goods. And so that's kind of, I guess, the best way I could simply explain it. And you could probably do a better job. But Turin Market was your next game. Why don't you go ahead and go a little bit into what you thought about that or how that came about?
Yeah, so that game was influenced by like modern art and a little bit of container. But the whole idea was I wanted to make a player-driven economy again, but everything had to be based off of perceptive value. So that game, I mean, in one word, that game would be perceptive value, or two words, whatever. The point of the game was that you're trying to balance what you think other people are going to bid and what you think things are worth in the game. But the fun part of it is that you can kind of trick people into taking lesser of a good that you are going to collect the most of, and then they have to pay you money in the end of the game. So I think there's a lot of mind games and strategy that go on in that game, and maybe it gets overlooked or doesn't get seen by some people that play it and just kind of pick it up and think it's a little simpler than it actually is, as far as the design goes. But yeah, the idea of the game is to have as much open market and perceptive value between players as you can have.
And then after that, you went kind of bananas and made a real-time construction game about Japanese architecture. Very interesting game. Jutaku, is that how you pronounce that?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And so I'm going to just let you talk about this one because I bet a lot of people out there haven't heard of this. And so I'd like you to just kind of, in your own best words, kind of describe what this game is, how it plays, and just kind of give a feel for how this game is supposed to run, because this is a very different game.
Yeah, this game is something else. I don't know why I decided to go with a real-time dexterity game after these other games, but the whole point of the game is to build these small Japanese homes, but you're sort of building an abstract model of them as the architect. You're designing them with these little wooden pieces that are kind of crazy shaped, and they have to meet certain conditions. So they have to be a certain number of floors, or they have to use a certain number of pieces. And you're racing other players to build on these crazy sized plots, which in Japan is kind of a thing you come across all the time. I mean, they have these micro plots that are only going to be 500 or 800 square feet or something. So sometimes they're crazy shaped. That's where the influence came from, was from spending so much time in Tokyo and seeing these little tiny plots there. But you've got like 70 pieces in the center of the table, and you're just pulling one at a time and trying to add them in to build up the design of your house. But the pieces are not like just squares or rectangles or triangles or something. They're all like crazy jagged shapes. So it's a really hard game. I mean, I have a hard time playing that game. My girlfriend always beats me. But yeah, that's kind of the pitch for it, I guess.
Well, let me ask you, do you feel that this game came about as a fusion of your two loves? You had talked about how you love minimal architecture and then your game design thing. Do you think that somehow that the idea for this game that came into your brain was just a fusing of those two loves?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I set about doing it, I was reading a book about Japanese architecture, and I was very influenced and inspired. So I set down some ground rules and said, this game needs to be very minimal, but it needs to have certain aspects to it and still be like fast and exciting. So
Awesome. That's great. Well, now we're going to kind of get into the big one that I'm sure people are most excited to hear about, because we should be able to get this released to people on audio and then on YouTube before the Kickstarter ends. But the new upcoming game, Import Export, which is doing wildly successful on Kickstarter, especially if you measure it by the standards of your previous designs, it's doing exceptionally well. And I know that you kind of put it out there real upfront. This is Glory to Rome meets Container, and that kind of just got everybody to kind of like take a second look, you know, like, ooh, what is this? And so the design of the game looks really sleek. It's very interesting. The Kickstarter page is really well laid out and kind of has a lot of information on there. But let's go ahead and just kind of get into this very interesting game, Import Export, and just tell me a little bit about how that game kind of came up, because this definitely seems like the biggest game that you've designed by far. So kind of what led to the forming of this one, and how that kind of has had an effect on your game designs.
yeah, so the inspiration for this game came one night after I played a couple of games. I know we played Container that night and we played Glory to Rome. So like those two games were obviously in there. We played a couple other games, and I was just sitting in bed after this game night, and I could not stop thinking about the economic systems that were going on in the games that we played, and how Glory to Rome was like a little bit one-sided for me. I absolutely love the game, and I love Chudok games, but I felt like just storing those victory points was kind of a weak aspect for the game for me. So I was thinking, how can I kind of take a little bit of the mechanics from a few of these games and put them together and then form my own economic system? And I literally stayed up all night. I did not sleep, and I designed 100 unique cards. I did all of the graphic work because I was like so inspired about it, which is usually how I work. I get really inspired by an idea and I just blast it out until I'm done. I just can't do anything else. So after I had finished that, we play tested it, and every single one of those 100 cards ended up changing into a different power through play testing, which is kind of funny. But the core aspects of the game and how the game played all formed that one night from that inspiration, and everything just kept growing. And the community has been super great in like giving me feedback and helping me to form the game into the best it can be, and changing things that were maybe not quite perfect. But for me, the aspect of balancing the economic system is where the real fun has come in. And all of the cards I've gone through like one by one and made sure that they're not going to give too much or too little. And you always have this play on like, do I want to rush to get active credits? Do I want to try to store passive credits? Do I want to try to build an engine that just explodes and grabs as much as I can, like on the last 2 or 3 turns? And that's what the game is all based around, is making those hard decisions, but having a great time and gaining powers and building an engine at the same time.
Well, I know that I've been doing a little bit of play testing on this for you and giving you some feedback on it. And I've had about 15 or so plays of this at this moment in time. And so I've really enjoyed playing it. And actually, I played last night with my friend Tony. He came over for a game day and he's like, I haven't gotten to play it yet. And I know you have a copy. Let's bust that out. And so it also plays really well two-player. So I think that that's something that should be said. But we played this game and he's a huge Glory to Rome fan. And he instantly, as soon as we got done playing it, he was like, this is, in my opinion, and this isn't his opinion, much better than Glory to Rome. And that's what Heath said. And I've never been a huge fan of Glory to Rome, so my opinion doesn't matter. But as someone that really liked Glory to Rome, he really enjoyed it. It was such an interesting game, though, because I actually tried to win with the Rolls Royce and did not work out. Have you ever seen that strategy win, by the way?
No, I've tried it twice. I'm usually the guy that tries it because I'm like, come on, this is going to work one time. But yeah, naming one card, even if like 50 of the cards are gone and you're only playing the base game, you still only have a 1/50th of a chance or something. So it's it's pretty hard, but I would love to take that chance every time I can, just because if you do it one time, it's going to be amazing.
I can't think of exactly how many, but I know of at least, I haven't gone through every card one by one, but I know of at least 2 game-ending cards. Are there any more?
So in the base game, there's 2 game-ending cards.
Okay, it's the Motherlode and the Rolls Royce then.
Yeah, and then in the expansion that came out with Jutaku, which you can get for free in the $80 pledge right now on the Kickstarter, there's another one called Graphics Cards, which you have to have the 3 most of any type of good at some point. And I can't remember if there's another stipulation. I don't think there's. And then there's 2 more that come out with the $80 pledge as well that are alternate win conditions, but they're a bit harder to get. One says you have to have double the amount of active currency and have the most goods of any player.
Oh, wow.
So that one's going to be a pretty rough.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, I think little things like that in the game that are just interesting. And if you see it happen once ever, it'll be kind of a very memorable experience. I mean, those kind of things are actually kind of what Glory to Rome is built on. But it definitely seems like you tempered a lot of the stuff apart from just finding crazy broken combos to more things that will affect you dynamically in the economy of the game. So the powers that you gain more than anything else are going to basically help you play a different game than everybody, kind of give you some asymmetrical powers, but at the same time, kind of help you more get an edge on the economic engine in one way or the other. So it's not really helping you break the game. And there's very few cards that I do feel are super overpowered. And I feel like every single card with its power level is kind of very well balanced to its load container size and its technology level. So it makes it very difficult to build them early in the game.
Yeah, definitely. I think the cards are meant to give you a little bit of a slight bonus. And the like alternate win condition cards, like the Motherlode, it's usually an all or nothing strategy. And you have to try to trick the other players and like really work towards this other goal that doesn't really have anything to do with winning the game the traditional way. And if you play with people who play the game a lot, then they're going to start picking up on these little nuances, and it's quite a difficult thing to do. I was surprised. Joe actually told me that he won with the Motherlode once, and I was like, no way, no one has ever pulled that off. We've tried many times. So it was quite impressive.
Yeah, I ended the game with 0 credits because I was spending about 15 about 15 cubes per turn just trying to like every time I was winning an import because I was just trying to like win it at all cost. And so it's an all or nothing strategy. But yeah, the impetus for the Motherlode, for those listening and don't actually know, is you actually have to gain 8 illegal good cards. And so if the game ends, you'll have 0 credits, but also take a ton of negative points. And so it's really all or nothing for that strategy because illegal goods are worth some negative points at the end. But yeah, it's really interesting that you can kind of gain those strategies in the game. But let me ask you this. And so this is kind of an interesting question. I didn't do quite the research to see what was your highest funded game to date, but I know Import Export has probably highly surpassed whatever that would be. I would probably even venture to say like maybe even 10 times what maybe your other highest one. And if you have the information, I'd love to hear it at this point. But Import Export has just kind of been explosively popular from your other games. And have you kind of noticed a change or anything different from running the Kickstarters from your previous Kickstarters to this one?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, every single Kickstarter I've done has gained a little bit more, but the jump from this one has just been huge. Like I was very surprised. My last Kickstarter did 5,500 or 5,600, and this one's sitting at 37,000 right now. So that's a pretty big gap.
So if you pull it up to about if that ends at about 5,500, you're going to be like 10 times what that one was, huh?
Yeah, it looks like it's heading in that direction. And like I said, I was very surprised. I did the Make 100 campaign. I tried it just for fun to do something different. And those pledges filled up in a couple of hours, and I had to like open up some of the stuff in there, like to make it fair for everybody. And I didn't want to keep anything exclusive after hearing people were concerned about it. But yeah, I was very underestimating the demand for the game, and I just feel very happy and humbled that people are enjoying the stuff that I'm putting out and designing, and I want to keep doing it. So
Yeah, it's very exciting. And to know that there's, kind of like that there is a potential jump for those indie publishers that might be making small games, that it really might just take one great idea that the community kind of all gets on board with and just kind of goes. But even then, the popularity of this, I'm hoping, will kind of lead people to kind of go look at your back catalog of the other games that you've had and kind of see, well, what else has this guy made that they might have missed before? And so I'm really excited about people maybe being able to explore that and get little gems like Poison Bottles and Turin Market. But let me ask you this. So we've talked a little bit about import export, but I know that there's a couple of features that are in the campaign that maybe people don't have all of the details on. And I know that they could go and probably read some more details about it. But real quick, while we're on the air, why don't you just share with some people some information that maybe they'd be happy to understand just kind of from your mouth. But one of the things that is available in this Kickstarter is there are going to be a Tokyo expansion. That's kind of one of the big things. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about what the Tokyo expansion is and kind of how that affects the game, because I know that that's something I'm really excited to see as well.
yeah, so the Tokyo expansion is obviously themed around goods that would come out of Tokyo. There's a cup of noodle and a Yakuza painting and some crazy stuff like that. All of the powers are a little more out there, and I tried to make them exciting because they're dual goods, so they're using two different types of goods together. But the other really fun thing about it is that you get to replace the supply island, which is going to be in the center of the table, with a new Port of Tokyo card. And that card allows people who don't have maybe the good contract that they want to start from their hand, they can pay a little bit to start one that's on the Port of Tokyo, which opens up some options for how you want to develop your strategy and gives you more ways to play the game forward. There's also a card from the Tokyo expansion that lets you just take those cards for free without paying for them if you build it first, or
Oh,
if you
wow.
contract it first. So the Tokyo expansion is adding a lot of cool gameplay elements on the cards themselves, but it also adds a huge extra thing to the game, which is the Port of Tokyo in the center.
hmm And then the capital expansion is another one that you had mentioned. And so the capital expansion adds a lot of different stuff too. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what that adds to the game?
Yeah, that one I'm so excited to get out because it really changes the way that you can look at the game. It adds another action into the game, which lets you swap a card from the supply island if you do it, but you can use this action to follow any other action. So it's kind of a way to get you into a good situation or out of a bad situation if you just need one specific card. But the cards themselves are what's really interesting because they are a new gray color. They can't be pirated and they can't be loaded normally. So you have to find weird ways to put them onto your ships using other powers that you have that you've been building in your engine. But what those cards do is, I think, the coolest part. Like one of them turns into an extra ship that you only use temporarily, and then it gets discarded. So it's going to be flowing through the game, and players are going to be able to get this card. But when they're building this, they have to keep in mind that they're giving up an extra shipment or an extra power to gain this temporary other thing that's going to boost their like smaller economy. So you're trying to make decisions about, do I want to give up having a shipment and like being able to get more goods and have more things in my imports to get this small economic boost, or get this small boost to build something else that's going to be helping me later in the game. So it adds another depth of decisions to make on top of what's already going on in the game. I would say you should definitely play the base game at least a few times before you add in this expansion. I would not jump straight into it. But yeah, I'm really excited for it, and I think it's going to add another level of depth to the game.
Yeah. And those are the two main things that are kind of being added or offered in this. I know that there's a small 10 card expansion, and then there's the couple of exclusive cards for the people that back at a high level. And other than that, that I believe is all that is the extras that are going to be offered for this campaign. Is that correct?
Yeah, for this campaign, so there's two expansions. There's the expansion that came with Jutaku. You can get all those independently. And then anybody who backs at the $80 level to get everything with the miniature model ships and all of the cards will get 3 extra cards. And I've decided nothing will be exclusive as far as gameplay goes. I've heard some feedback from backers, and I very strongly feel now that there should be nothing gameplay related that's exclusive. But if you want to get those 3 cards, you have to get in for like the whole deluxe edition that comes with the miniature model ships. So
Right. And that's good. I know that exclusivity is something that can sometimes drive a Kickstarter, but people in the gaming community are they kind of get a little upset about because of the fact that, well, hey, I missed it and now my game is less good as another person's game because I don't have this thing. And so it's good that you're trying to temper that exclusivity and make it available to others, but also trying to, make, you have to support this project in order to make sure that you get the full everything, which is probably a good choice on your part to kind of do away with full exclusivity on certain items. And so I definitely kind of respect that aspect of it.
yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I didn't have the same mindset coming in because I don't really think about exclusivity that much, but a lot of other people were concerned about it, and I can definitely see their viewpoint. So from now on, there will be no exclusive gameplay items from Darkflight Games. I can guarantee that. I consider everything a learning experience. I love running the Kickstarters and talking to people and interacting with them. So every time I do it, I learn something new, and I feel that taking in that feedback and being an open-minded developer and publisher really helps to shape the games in a better way.
And I know personally, I can speak to this, is that you've sent me a copy to do some play testing on. And so I've done a lot of play testing on this game. And we've communicated back and forth about a lot of different choices, graphic design wise, gameplay wise. And everything that I've said, you've taken to heart. And I've even actually seen you completely change stuff right there as the Kickstarter was running to reflect some of the items that I had told you in my gameplay experience. And you said, you know what, that makes sense. And I've seen you change it. And so you've really kind of taken a lot of what the community has said, and you're trying to make the best game that you possibly can that still fits in what your idea of how the game should work, and kind of look at what people actually want and make adjustments from there. And so that's another really, really good thing that I think that you've been doing. But real quick, a couple more questions that I kind of want to just ask you real quick. But what do you feel as a designer? I know that import export is right now kind of a very big and focused thing, but as a designer, what do you feel your design goals are? Where do you feel like you're going to head, and what do you feel like as a designer you really want to kind of see yourself do?
Yeah, so for me, I love exploring systems, and I have a very structured mind, I would say. But I'm also an artist, and part of making games for me is about art and exploring where that can go. So I like to push into things that are completely different, things that are quirky, things that make you look at the world in a different way, which is what art is all about. Art is about coming out with a different mindset after you have an experience. And I like to bring that to the game world. And every game that I do, I want it to feel inspiring for me as well. I want the joy to like be welling up inside of me that I can be exploring something in such a unique way. So my design goals are really to see where I can push certain parts of the gameplay and the theme to bring it all together and create an experience that is unique and different, that leaves people with this feeling of like what just happened, or how did this experience come about? And feeling very inspired when they're done playing. That's my end goal. I wouldn't say that there's like, I need to make the best economic game, or I need to make the best game that falls on these principles. It's more a matter of exploring what can possibly come about from a game, defining what a game is, and putting in my own interests and pursuits into it.
Awesome. Well, okay. And now here's a question that I'm pretty sure that you aren't prepared to answer. But we are in the board gaming community, and the board gaming community is, if anything, impatient. And the big thing that I wanted to ask you about is import export is on Kickstarter. It's doing well. It's going to be coming out. Backers will receive their copies and they'll be excited. But what is Darkflight Games up to next? What is the next thing on the slate? Because is there anything past import export that's being worked on, being hyped, anything that's kind of in the background that you've been kind of working on a design for? And I'd like to hear a little bit about what maybe the future might hold for Darkflight Games, and kind of just put a little teaser out there for people for the future.
Sure. I can't release too much information, but I will say that I'm working on something I am really excited about. So it's going to be a 3-part game series, and certain things are going to overlap between the games, including some of the pieces. But it's going to be set in a world that's from a certain artist. I'm not going to name any names or say too much about it right now. But the first game is going to have some miniatures, and it's going to be based around Japanese vending machines. And that's all I'm going to say for now.
Very interesting. Oh man, that's exciting. I have two veins of gaming that I really enjoy. I love games that are incredibly heavy, and I love games that are incredibly quirky. And I think that's why Albin Viard is probably my favorite designer, because he kind of like straddles that threshold in a very interesting way. But that's really interesting. A game about Japanese vending machines is by far probably one of the quirkiest ideas I think I've ever heard about in a game. But that's exciting. But we'll look forward to that. Well, I kind of put out a call on Twitter and Facebook just to ask some people about what questions that they might have for you. And so I got a couple of responses. So this is going to be straight from people that in the last 15 minutes or so have asked questions on social media. And so I'm going to kind of give some of their questions for you, and you could probably answer those. All right. So Thomas Chidster is asking, are you planning on having any actual reviews from people that have played the game? So will there be any video reviews that will be actually out for this game before the Kickstarter's over?
Potentially. I sent out some copies. One of the reviewers had something come up and they weren't actually able to do it. So that's why there isn't a video so far. There's someone that I always work with that I was looking to have them do it that kind of fell through at the last minute. So that's why there isn't already a video. But I have copies going around to different people, and I can't say exactly when they'll be able to get the video up. And this is kind of my bad for not getting on top of that as quickly. But there are written reviews now, and there's multiple blog reviews. But I really want to get some video reviews up. If they aren't up by the end of the Kickstarter, then they will be up shortly after. And my apologies for that, but I'll get them up as soon as I can.
Okay. And then let me ask you this, and this is from Sean Ramirez, who is a podcaster on the Dukes of Dice. But he said he backed for just the base game, and he wants to know if there is any plan for a retail release of this game or the expansions that he would not be able to get in the Kickstarter if he backed for just the base game. And so what are the plans for the retail distribution of import-export?
Yeah, so right now we're looking at a model of having the base game go to retail and then having like a package that includes everything else as a separate thing. And those will probably be the only two ways to get the game after. But I'm still open to some more ideas as far as distributing the expansions individually, which we'll probably do through our website on like an individual order basis. But if you want to get it outside of the US through distributors, then you're probably going to be looking at base game and like an everything package game.
Okay, awesome. And so real quick, because that's all the questions that we had, a lot of people were kind of commenting some silly things. But let me just kind of go ahead and leave everybody with this. But thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this interview. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you were able to get some valuable information out of this. But let me go ahead and just put this out there for everybody. Jordan, is there anything that you, on the behalf of Darkflight Games, would like to just let everyone know out there about this campaign, or perhaps just in general, and just kind of let everybody know before this interview ends?
Yeah, I mean, I would first like to thank everybody that supported Darkflight Games and believed in the small indie publisher. I know that sometimes backing a Kickstarter or getting into a company that's unknown is a little bit risky, and sometimes the games don't turn out how you think they will, but I really do appreciate all the support, and I am pushing as hard as I can every time I have a game or a Kickstarter to make it the best it can be and to listen to feedback. So if you want to tell me anything about the game, or give me feedback about why you don't like it or why you do like it or something you think should be fixed, just send me a message. We're always happy to talk to anybody under any circumstance. So yeah, drop us a line. We are happy to have you here. And if you backed, thank you very much.
And where can they find you on the internet, Jordan?
Yeah, so we have a website, darkflightgames.com. You can also email us at info@darkflightgames.com. We have a Facebook page. We have an Instagram, the normal social media. So if you Google Darkflight Games, we should come up.
All right. Well, this has been the Deep End Games interviewing Jordan Draper with Darkflight Games. And so we really enjoy you tuning in, and we'll hopefully get some more interviews out to you soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.